right. Joy week number, whatever it is.
Permanent joy.
We're getting there. It's October. October is joy month.
It needs to be.
We need something.
No kidding. Everyone, that is Nisha Sharma, one of our very favorite people who we are going to talk to today about all sorts of things that make her feel joy, including very likely the 50 Shades movies, because apparently that's a thing we talk about now.
Every episode. Here's the other thing, though. Nisha, how long have we been talking about having you on for this episode?
Probably like a year and a half.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
Because immediately you were like, I have a topic. And we were like, yay. And then, here we are.
We're all just doing our best.
It's okay. It builds anticipation. It's like the legend is now here.
There you go.
But we have talked a lot about Nisha. I feel like everyone feels like they know you. Well, let's do it. Welcome to Fated Mates, everyone. I'm Sarah McLean. I write romance novels and I read romance novels.
I'm Jennifer Prokop. I am a romance reader and critic.
And we are here with Nisha Sharma, who also writes and reads romance novels and also YA novels.
That is the truth.
And we're very excited to have you, Nisha. Thanks for joining us.
Yay, I'm excited to be here, even though you guys totally called me out for my 50 Shades obsession.
Oh, and then did you see wait, is the episode out? Well, by now the episode is out where we also tossed Andy Christopher just right under the bus.
You know what? No, there is no shame. Anything that brings you joy in 2020, we are here for. And I've watched all 3 movies, and will tell you, I have had a great amount of joy from watching those movies.
Me too. I really enjoyed that far more than I should have.
Well, I also, here's the other thing. I'm always doing show notes, right? I'm always looking and I found all these hilarious articles about things that we talked about. There was an entire article I saw in Business Insider, I swear to God, about basically it was the 50 Shades Darker movies are lying about lipstick.
I love it. Do you feel like you missed out on a cultural juggernaut? Because wait a second, now I have literally blocked out the 50 Shades episode, Jen. You only read
I've only read the first book. So what's really wild is the second 2 movies are my canon now for what happened.
They're pretty close to canon.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I mean, they were written by E.L. James's husband,
sure.
So I can't imagine that they wouldn't be close to canon.
Agreed.
But they are. I don't think the second one ends in the same place as the books, but maybe we should turn to our expert.
We do. We have an expert here.
The second one does not end in the same place as the books, no. But what I will say is that, the movies are... I've always enjoyed the movies more than the books, even though I did devour the movies at a rate that is alarming.
You mean the books?
Or the books, I absorbed the books at a rate that is quite alarming. The third one came out when I was still in law school. I started with the first one, and I would only read it during tax law, and I swear to God, I almost failed that class because I was reading E.L. James the whole semester.
Well, it's fine. At least it wasn't contract law, because then it would have gotten confusing.
Right.
Maybe.
You were like, that's not what I learned in 50 Shades.
Yeah.
I feel like I've somehow slipped the contract, a relationship contract in every single one of my stories. Even if it's a passing comment, because it's an homage to my time with E.L. James.
I love it. I love it.
So she has made a lasting impact, and no one can take that away from me.
Never. Nope. And no one should. Certainly no one here wants to.
I'm I loved it.
But wait a second, because I gotta say that I'm unsurprised now. So I knew what Interstitial Nisha wanted to do for 18 months. And I am unsurprised now that I know that she was a midnight attendee at these movies. And she had all the gear.
Nisha, I think you need to tell us about your topic. We are along for the ride.
We are here to talk about organized crime and mafia romance. I am so excited.
Oh, goodness. Woo. Woo. writing. You guys, there is a whole big pool
there is
of Mafia romances. It's interesting because in doing the prep for this episode, and as everyone knows, like, I don't actually prep for episodes usually at all. But I was like, I want to have a sort of casual ability to drop lots of names. And I was like, I have, I don't know, 6 or 7 names that I can sort of drop off the top of my head, including Cressley, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I went down the rabbit hole on Goodreads lists today, and I was like, who are all these people? Yeah. What is this world that I have opened? This can of worms that Nisha Sharma has opened for me.
It is glorious.
So now I'm very excited. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to hear Nisha's recommendations. And I'm excited to get really to the bottom of organized crime romance. Because as I told Nisha, I grew up around the mafia. Mm-hmm. So it's not so sexy as you would think to me. But I'm going to get to Russians. We're going to get to, I did not grow up around Russian mafia.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that mafia stories are really interesting because, like, they kind of fall into that same problematic category that we all have, we've kind of identified the subgenre books that have fallen into that category. But it has that, like, rose gold tint to it that romance gives it, and that is what is, like, makes all the stories very attractive.
Yes, because I will say, having grown up, so I sort of today was like, how much am I going to talk? Like, how much of real me am I going to reveal here on this episode? But
let's do it.
So whatever. We're all friends. So I grew up in Rhode Island, and my actual last name is extremely Italian, and my father is Italy Italian, mm-hmm. Not what we would refer to in Rhode Island as Italian, which is more of like a mafia Italian, is Italian. But my dad got to America, and he got a job in Rhode Island working for a scrap metal company, which was run largely by the mafia, unsurprisingly. I mean, we've all seen The Sopranos. And so when I was growing up, my dad had a lot of friends who were kind of connected in the family. Not my family, other people's family. Right. The family. And what's interesting about it is, like, when you grow up in that world and you sort of go to events with these people, and I think we spent a lot of time, like, there were a lot of, like, business things that we had to go to because my dad worked in scrap metal, where, like, there would be a Christmas party and all the children would be invited, and you'd go, and, like, if you were like me, who had read a bunch of books about organized crime, like, knew a lot about the mafia because she'd watched a ton of the Godfather movies, and, like, hadn't actually lived that world, like, the perception of that world is a very odd, like, walking into that world is a very odd experience, because there's so much money, mm-hmm. and there's so much sort of, like, this sort of sense of, like, hierarchy that doesn't make a ton of sense. And there's always in my family, like with my dad, there was always a little bit of, I think, nervousness. Like, he was always keenly aware mm-hmm. of, like, the line that he was not willing to cross, and therefore he was always an outsider because of that. And it's interesting because as he got older and then retired, and then he was more willing to talk about the kinds of people who we were interacting with all the time. But what I will say is they are generally not that smart as people. And that's sort of makes a lot of sense, right? Because mm-hmm. the hierarchy of kind of bruiser mm-hmm. mobsters is designed for there to be, like, a capo, right? Like the head of the family. Mm-hmm. And then, like, everybody else sort of falls in line. So, but I will say this, being the child of somebody who worked in a scrap metal company, and also somebody who read a lot of, romantic suspense, and was a very sort of interested in storytelling, I absolutely don't understand why more people don't put people into car crushers and disappear bodies, because that is a real easy way, it seems, to get rid of a body. and very likely why the mafia, probably a lot of people do get disappeared in car crushers. But if we'll put a link in show notes to like what a car crusher does, but it basically takes a regular sized sedan and turns it into a cube.
Huh.
I mean, there was an episode of Bones once where she was able to find the killer, like who had murdered someone in a car crusher. So I feel like there's always a way if someone is really interested, but you're right. I feel like the mafia would use car crushers as like
it feels like so. Yeah. And I can remember like saying to my dad one day, like going, because I worked my first summer job, I worked at the scrap metal company I worked for like weighing scrap metal as it was coming. I ran the scale.
Oh, wow.
And so like, you know, people would just drive their like giant trucks would come in like with their beds full of scrap metal, and you would weigh them going in and then weigh them coming out, and then they get paid. And it was sort of, you know, the characters who came in and out of there were the characters you would imagine kind of came in and out of there. And I can remember asking my dad like once, like, have you ever found a dead body in the car crusher? And him feeling like, what is wrong with you?
You know what this makes me think is like every place you are must have its own like place where dead bodies get disposed. And I have zero I have zero connection to the mob in any way, but I do vividly remember in 5th grade, Mike Winslow's dad was an FBI agent in school. And
hey, Mike Winslow.
Hi, Mike Winslow. He came day, like the FBI agents came for a day to basically like scare all the little elementary school kids. And I remember, I swear to God, I have vivid memories of them talking about, I grew up in Cleveland, how they would like basically put cement shoes on people and drop them into Lake Erie. And I remember being like,
do you think that's real?
I swear to God, I remember just like being in the school gym all day and them scaring the shit out of us by talking about dead bodies in Lake Erie and how drugs were going to kill you. And it really worked for me. It did. It worked. It worked.
It does feel like this mythology of the mafia or the organized crime mythology is very real in a lot of cities, right? Because now I live in New York City, and there's that whole like cement shoes in the Hudson, and then there's like Hoffa. Isn't he is he Chicago?
New Jersey, I think. New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like Capone in Chicago. Oh. Like it feels like there's sort of this constant sense of like organized crime being in the zeitgeist.
In Chicago, you can before times, one of the like most popular tour things is you could go on the like Chicago the Al Capone tour.
There was nothing in Al Capone's vault, but it wasn't Geraldo's fault.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And they would like take you all around to all the places where Al Capone killed people.
Shout out to Tom Hardy, who just played Al Capone.
Okay,
in a movie.
listen, it was great. A really bad movie. That was a very upsetting movie.
Don't watch it, everyone.
Do not recommend. Like, I was like, hot Al Capone. And I was like,
but well done, Tom, for taking a risk.
Nice try. 5 points for effort.
Wait, so Nisha, but we both have these like gangster stories, but like you picked this, so
tell us why.
Tell us why, friend.
Well, first of all, like my reference points are like TV shows like Bones, so let's start there. Like I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable about like the real true mafia situation that's in our world, but I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is
home of The Office.
Joe Biden's hometown.
It is Joe Biden's hometown.
Shout out Joe Biden. Everybody, please make sure that you vote early if you're going to vote early, and you get in line on election day and stay there.
Yes. All of that, everyone. Scranton, Pennsylvania. So it's actually it's like a hotbed for organized crime, or it used to be.
Really?
It was. And we used to, I went to like a preparatory school, and in this preparatory school where like I was a scholarship kid, there were a lot of very expensive vehicles in the garage and in the car lot. And we'd all, kind of wonder like, is that family money? What kind of family money is that? Like, is it still happening?
Family money.
Exactly, right? And I've always liked crime shows. My like genesis of romance the genesis of my romance obsession was this 1970s Bollywood movie that deals with organized crime, because corruption is still a huge problem in India, and it's kind of part of almost like an accepted part of conversation in a lot of of the South Asian homes that I have been a part of or I've gone to, where it's like, oh yes, like the police cop, the cops and the police chief, like they will accept money, and you have to pay off this person in order to make this Bollywood movie. And so the concept of like dirty money and organized crime is something that I've lived with, and it's not necessarily been something that I've ever been fascinated to explore like in real life, but when it has that rose gold tint on it and you start talking about these families that will do everything for each other, and you start looking at how a hero will go through literally commit murder in order to protect a woman. Like, I feel like that because of the genesis of my romance career, it has become a point where I this is now part of my history, and I love organized crime for that. I will say that I'm very hesitant to always write it versus read it, because I am a woman of color, and the books that I write feature, South Asian characters that are, right now, almost all of them are Punjabi. And, there's a drug problem in Punjab. There's a huge drug crisis in Punjab because of organized crime and a lot of corruption. So it is something that I have tiptoed into in the Singh family trilogy, but I'm hesitant to write a diverse mafia story because I'm afraid that sometimes when a woman of color or a person of color will write a story with that identity for the main character, it opens doors for false narratives that could be potentially damaging to the community as a whole. So I'm very careful about the words that I put on the page right now and the types of characters that I put on the page, but I do love the idea of diversifying all of the messy, complicated stories that take chances. And right now, I think organized crime is primarily very white and straight, and and I do enjoy the stories, but I feel like we need to put that disclaimer out there, right?
Well, that whiteness is real. It feels like, Jen and I we've never done a interstitial on them, but we have talked off air, if that's how we refer to this, about motorcycle romances being a real problem too, because they're often sort of wrapped up in organized crime network as well. Or
right.
At least they sort of do the same family work. And I want to talk about found family being such a cornerstone of romance. And maybe that's part of why we find these books so appealing. But first I want to just piggyback on what you were saying about it being very white, because I think motorcycle romances are also extremely white.
Yeah.
There are several subgenres in romance that are traditionally extremely white, and largely it's because in these genres, these subgenres, we're valorizing a very specific kind of criminal.
Yeah.
Namely white and cis and het.
So to me, the big three, really white, really heterosexual, cisgendered, it's mafia, cowboys, and motorcycle clubs. Those are that's the trifecta of that.
That does feel like the three. I can't think of any others that are super. I mean, I think there are certain areas of sports that do that. I think the hockey romance.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe too. That's the fourth.
But also, no. I don't know. I don't mean to.
No, it's okay. But what I was going to say about that though is the thing that I think is really interesting about those three. Maybe we'll put aside sports. Maybe that's a separate way in which we just whitewash things. Is cowboy in popular culture? Though they're not the only one of those that's like big, like has a through line of being big for a long time, I feel like is Mafia. Like cowboy movies.
Even
Well,
cowboys?
I feel like they kind of have their heyday, like it pops up. But like we are pumping out cowboy romances every goddamn month. Like maybe there's like one big cowboy movie every 10 years, one big Western. Right?
Oh,
See what I mean?
And the most recent one, it feels like it was Brokeback Mountain, which sort of throws out the whole.
Right. So it's
Right.
like, whereas maybe back, if you're talking about like the 70s where it's like Gunsmoke and it was like TV and all that was like ongoing. And then maybe with Motorcycle Club Romance, I guess there was that TV show people watched,
Sons of Anarchy. Nisha, were you a Sons of Anarchy fan?
I was not, actually.
Yeah. And I don't really watch TV, right?
Me neither, but
It was like too close to like, it was too close to the truth for me.
To white
And
supremacy.
to white supremacy, and I couldn't do it. Like that's not the kind of romance that I'm here for.
Agreed.
Cowboys, like at least the way it works now, cowboys and motorcycle club romances feel really like a romance only genre. Mafia feels like a very American genre.
Yeah. It's like a
Yes.
cornerstone of American culture.
And the thing, and I get it, I know it's very cisgendered and cishet to talk about it this way, but I think my question is, and I don't have an answer, is are romances, many of which are written by women, answering or like responding to a way in which a lot of straight white men love mafia stuff? And I just don't know the answer to that.
Are we arguing that straight white men are that women don't come for like The Godfather or like the or Sopranos or any of the like mafia stuff outside of romance?
So-
Because I feel like I did in a lot of ways.
did.
Like, and I love a
Sure,
mafia
I do
movie.
too, but here's my question, and maybe it's different. The Sopranos probably is like the last thing I really watched from beginning to end in that genre. I am fascinated by the way in which women exist in that world, but I was never under any illusion that women were a main part of that world.
No, and also in all of these, there is always the sense of like the knife's point. I think what happens in romance around mafia, around the sort of organized crime, like criminal mafia concept, is similar to what happens in all media, because there is always a sense of like, you may not want these men to succeed, right? Like there's a balance between like, do you want them to win or not? And in romance, there's such a morality chain story that gets sort of wrapped into the mafia story that doesn't happen in other books, in other forms of media. Like when you think about that morality chain storyline in organized crime movies or television shows, whenever a woman enters and like tries to pull someone out of the family, they die.
Oh, yeah.
Either the woman dies or they both die, right? Every time I go out, they pull me back in. I mean, it's like a famous thing from The Godfather.
Absolutely. And so I guess I would say that to me feels different, the way in which the story plays out. I mean, and I don't know, I can't speak to that.
But in romance, she wins, right? Like she pulls.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go ahead and say, I have never in my life, in all of my years of reading romance, ever read a queer mafia romance.
I will say this. Today I went looking for a queer mafia romance, like for just because I was like, surely I've read one, right? Like, and I looked at the queer mafia list on Goodreads, which we will link to in show notes, because I'm unable to recommend any of those books because I haven't read them. But there is it seems like there is a large subgenre of the subgenre.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
don't know
that
if Nisha
in self-publishing, people are doing amazing work. Yes. They're trying to really bring added context and texture to this subgenre, in romance. And, I was trying to think of the last, few queer mafia romances that I read that I really enjoyed. And you're right, like they still are so few and far between, but that Goodreads list, I think, will help if people are like specifically looking to explore that, that subgenre. But I think that to kind of go back to Jen's point, there's something that's really amazing that's done in Mafia Romance with the female character. And it's like the authors are always trying to give them a sense of agency and a sense of power, even though that the power dynamics and the power structure that exist in the story aren't in favor of, I mean, no, I know we're talking in binary terms right now, but it aren't in favor of the female character. And that's what's so fascinating to me. Like, how does this woman get power? And, you know, and like Cressley is a great example of that. Like Cressley gives power to the woman in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But Cressley also really, we spent a lot of time that first season talking about those 3 books, right? The professional, the master, and the player. And I mean, 2 of those books are Jen and I would say like they're in our top 10 romances of all time. So, but what's interesting about what Cressley does is Cressley removes the hero from the crime almost instantly, right? All of those heroes, well, in the player, it's not actually the case, but in the first 2 books, those heroes make their money in organized crime. But you never see, the closest you get is in the professional, right? Where he works for the Don. But in the master, he just has a ton of money.
He's trying to get out, maybe.
To everything, right? And I think that there's like, that's a very overt and solid choice as a writer for those characters, because I mean, it is a tricky thing, like showing characters doing bad stuff on the page. And you know, I think about like, so there's Cressley, and then of course Jen and I talk about Annika Martin a lot on the podcast, and we love those Annika Martin books. They are fabulous. But again, those heroes are doing, or the hero in the first of those Annika Martin books is doing bad things for a moral reason, right? Like it's I mean, well, Eric would be like, vengeance is not moral. But like, it's also not like, I'm going to steal your booze, right?
Right. Right. Or it's, I just want money, or it's, I'm a, you know, psychopath. I mean, like, you know, what's funny, because we're going to talk a lot about, I think, like, women in these worlds. And I feel like you're right. Like, that patina of, like, the rose-colored glasses of sort of the way this works out. But a movie I think about, and I feel like I've mentioned this before, is in Traffic. Catherine Zeta-Jones, it's a movie, right? She realizes she's like just like living this happy suburban lifestyle in La Jolla, California, and doesn't really realize what her husband's business is. But once she realizes he's in the drug trade, she essentially like takes over. Because she's like, I don't want to lose my lifestyle. And so that's going to mean I'm going to be willing to like step into it. But when you watch that movie, it's not heartwarming. It's sort of chilling. Right?
Yeah.
So it's...
And then you think about, did you guys ever watch Weeds?
No.
Ever? So Weeds is Mary Louise Parker, and her husband died. She's a stay-at-home mom in California. Her husband dies, and she's like stuck. She hasn't worked in a decade, 15 years. She doesn't know how to get a job to like keep her kids, you know, fed. And so she starts to deal marijuana, which is the first season. And then she gets sort of wrapped up in this kind of drug trade, and she becomes like a queen pin.
Yeah.
Like, if that's a word. And there's something really compelling about that whole story, that whole show, because you're like, I've never seen this story told with
A white lady?
A white lady like running the show,
right?
But I mean, do any of you have a book on your list that's like, she's the mafioso?
So the 6th book in Katie Roberts' O'Malley series.
I love that series.
It's so good. It's so great. So like the first 5 are Irish mafia in Boston, and then the last one is Irish mafia princess with Russian mafia head in New York. And the last one, she's like the youngest.
What's the title, Nisha?
Oh, good Lord. I feel like I should have had that ready to go.
Is it the Bastard's Bargain? Is this the one?
It's one of the bargain books, isn't it?
I think so. I think it's the Bastard's Bargain.
This is the one. Its book is fucking amazing. But apparently, this was a hero. People were like, "There's no way you could redeem him." And I read it. It's like the first one I read, and I was like, "Yeah, this guy's fucking great. What's the problem?" And they were like, "He tortured people." I was like, "I don't think I care."
I mean,
talk about making some choices, Katie Robert. Like in that story, the heroine is basically like the hero says, "I was promised a bride." And I'm going to take a bride. And the heroine is like, Katie had been building the attraction between the two characters for a couple books. So it's not like the attraction didn't exist between the two. And he gives her an ultimatum saying like, this is what I'm going to do to your family, or you can marry me. And she's like, well, I guess we'll go with this other option. And she's also trigger warnings. There's addiction in the book, so.
I laugh only because Eric is always like
that's
you
the
two
thing.
are going to put a trigger warning on like oh, be careful, the horse dies, but not on, I'm like, it's fine.
Listen, if you hadn't given that trigger warning for that book, I swear to God, I don't know what it would have happened. I would have been texting you at 2 a.m, been very upset.
See?
Very, very upset. So I appreciate that trigger warning, Eric. That was necessary. But there is addiction in the story, so just keeping that in mind. In addition to murder and mayhem,
the mafia,
in
and all the
addition
things that come with
to
it.
organized crime.
It is the Bastard's Bargain, by the way, guys.
And in that story, she becomes this powerful force that ends up saving him. And I absolutely love it. Like, you can see the character growing into that mold. I think that there are a couple more that I like want to say that like have heroines that are in this leadership role in that series. Like the first book, The Marriage Contract, she is the daughter of the Irish mafia family.
The competitors, or like the enemies, right? Or no, she's the daughter.
She's the first book in that 6-book trilogy by Katie Robert is about the oldest daughter of the Irish mafia family.
That's the marriage contract.
That's the marriage contract, and she also has a significant amount of power, and her father is basically like, you have to lead the family and do what's right, and we're going to join these families.
Yeah, it's like a marriage of convenience story.
Yeah, and it's wonderful the way that the hero and the heroine first meet in an alley. It's just great. So that would probably be another one. I think those are the ones that really attract me the most, the ones where the heroine has really like embraced the mafia lifestyle and is like, I'm here for, I'm not exactly excited about the moral implications of the work that I'm doing, but if I have to protect my family, if I have to protect the ones that I love, I will do what I have to do.
So for you, it's like tied up in not only power, but also duty or loyalty.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think coming from a very large Indian family where it's like, I know that there are some people who have kind of approached family as like, you don't have to stay with the ones that you're born with, especially if they're problematic and they hurt you, and like you should like do what's best for your safety. But coming from the South Asian family, we've always overlooked smaller flaws that are just irritating, and it's like you have to accept that because they're family, right? Like that is
smaller flaws, like being a mobster.
Yeah.
And so to me, in my Nisha brain, for some reason that's okay. It's
I like it.
Oh, mobster is considered a smaller flaw according to my mother, and I'm okay with this.
Fair. So,
I mean, but there is also this other piece, right? Which is, so that's like the one way where like the hair, and I'm again unsurprised. Like Nisha writes these badass like heroines who run their own businesses, and
of course that would appeal to you,
like,
right?
kick ass, take names, right? But then there's the other side, the flip side, and like this is appealing too in a lot of ways. For all the ways, there's something very, I don't know where I'm going. No, I know where I'm going, but I'm all
You'll
over
get
the
there.
place. So there's this really appealing kind of almost like old-fashioned like historical feel to some of these books, in that in several of them, the ones that I sort of immediately could name off the top of my head, the hero is basically like, I can't love you because you will be harmed by your relationship to me.
Yes, so good.
If I love you, I am putting you in danger. And I'm thinking about like C.D. Reese has her Corruption series, which begins with Spin, which is short for the hero's name, Spinelli. And he's like the head of like a family in Los Angeles, like quotation mark family in Los Angeles. And the heroine is like a person who he just like cannot, like, she is too good for him. She's like up on a pedestal. He can't touch her. He'll hurt her if he lets himself get too close. Like if he lets her get too close, he's going to be harmed too. Like he can't leave space in his brain for her. And I mean, I love that. Same. Like I love that in a hero at any time in any book where it's like, and I mean, that's like a classic romantic suspense trope too, right? Like, is if I spend any time with you, you're going to be a distraction and get us both killed. Which I love.
Like, put it on a plate and serve it for dinner. I will eat all of that up. I will eat all of that up. I mean, I think everything about a hero who believes he is not worthy enough is like just so great when it comes to. I feel like everyone on Twitter after this episode is going to be like, Nisha, we didn't know you as well as we thought we did, and we don't know if this is okay.
Well, I do think there are some tropes where you like reveal that you love them and you feel like you're really showing something, right? I think for Sarah, like your example, I definitely think like Cressley's books fit in that bucket.
The Master, for sure.
Which is my favorite. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think the other two are just so instantly like, oh my God, I have to have her.
Yeah, which is also great. Well, I think that's it too. Like the rules of society don't seem to apply the same way. And so then...
But that's what it is. It feels so, and it's everything that Nisha was just saying. Like the rules are so intense and so different than anything in the rest of the world in 2020. But like it feels like in these small bubbles of power and privilege, and like the family's rules are paramount.
Okay, so I have a third thing that I think is really appealing about these books. And for these, I'm going to use probably my, outside of the Master, and like occasionally like I'll dip into one of these. Like I read the Bastard's Bargain, but not like the rest of them. A series I do really like by Roxy Rivera called Her Russian Protector. Is about the Russian mafia in Houston. And the one that I really liked the best was called Ivan. And I think the thing that the other thing about these books is you have someone who is outside of the world who only thinks, like, I swear to God, you guys, I really only think it exists in like books and movies. And so you have this innocent who for some reason has to enter into the world of the mafia, right? It's either accidental or it's on purpose. And then they discover that like actually there's this whole layer of like society that exists underneath what they thought. And I think there's something then really interesting to me about putting a character, and I mean, often, again, it's so cishet. Often it's a woman, right, who's like, I'm entering into this world. And in this case, in Ivan, Aaron is our main character. Oh, we should tell Aaron, Clayton and Aaron. It's Aaron. Remember, Aaron was like, there's never an Aaron. I'm about to text her. her sister is in some sort of trouble. And she has been told if she goes to this like MMA or MMA. Is that what the fighters are? I'm like,
The fighting thing.
goes to this gym that's owned by Ivan. She could ask for some help.
I love Ivan already.
It's really great, right?
Oh,
So she could ask Ivan for help finding her sister who's in some sort of trouble. And of course, she's like, she's with a friend who's like, you can't go in there. And, she's like, no, I can. This is the only person in Houston who could possibly help me. But in every single one of the series, it's often this plot is like, I'm drawn into a world I didn't really think existed. So one woman, it's her neighbor is, like the cleaner or something. And, and one woman who actually falls in love with like the head guy, Nikolai, I think is that one, is she's just like a waitress in the restaurant he owns. And so I think that there's something really appealing too about people drawn into the world that's, like you enter into the world that you didn't even know existed. And I think that's another thing that's often really appealing about these books.
I think that, like, to kind of piggyback onto that, the ability of the heroine to explore an area that is so fearful for us in real life. It's like she's basically pushing boundaries and exploring an area of like or a family or a world that causes deep like upset for us in real life and ends up being able to navigate it successfully and conquer those fears. That's always like the idea of fear has always been something that's really fascinating to me, and how characters basically overcome it in order to achieve a goal that is wonderful and shiny and never really considered attainable in our real world.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of Ivan, her friend is like trying to talk her out of it. And she says, these are not the kind of men you go to for help. These are the kind of men who usually need help escaping. So then, right, what you're really also doing is, I think, really driving into something I think a lot of us are like maybe it's just me working through in romance, which is, pure patriarchy, right? Like these systems are like designed by men and benefit men, and men are part of them and women are not. And so it's often really like super charged, right? So yeah, a woman sort of being brave enough to like really uncover that world or enter that world and then conquer that world, even if it's not that she's becomes a part of like the crime family, but to like sort of tame the man in this case, right, who's part of it. That's my id.
I mean, but it's pure id it really does harken back to those like old books, right? Because I'm thinking about like Liquette's Lies You Tell.
So good. One of my favorite mafia romances of all time, by the way.
It's so good. But I think that the premise is that these two were like in love and they are separated by circumstance and like what is essentially a misunderstanding, but she thinks he's like gone evil and wants her dead. And so she's like faked, essentially like living a new life, like pretending like because she has a child to his child. And she's hiding in plain sight. And he finds her, and it is like a complete 180 in terms of his focus, right? Like he was the Don, and now like literally he is willing to do anything to get this woman and to like love her and treat her the way that she deserves. And there's something about that arc, and it's not specific to Mafia Romances at all, but like about the arc of like, I have a singular focus here, and it is, I have a singular focus here, and now my singular focus is redirected on the heroine, right? Like it's you above everything else, which is added to, this layer of morality chain, right, comes into play in Mafia Romances. And I mean, it's also like, it seems Liquette does it so beautifully, and it's that book is incredible. And then you have kind of on the flip side where like Jessa Kane does it,
Right.
and like she's not like those books are designed as like pure erotic romance, like they are a straight shot of erotic pleasure. But I'm thinking about like The Fighter's Prize, whose hero is also Russian, whose hero is also an MMA fighter, and who is tied up in this like world of like fixing fights and like running gambling rings and that kind of whole world. And that goes back to what Jen was saying about like suddenly this like kind of person who didn't know very much about this world needs access to this world, right? This is a classic old-fashioned trope too Jessa has done, like where the heroine has to sell herself to the fighter. Essentially, she gives herself as a gift to a fighter to somehow like finagle her father's gambling debts. But in that moment, like he too has, I mean, Jessa Kane heroes, forget it. They see the heroine and like one sentence in, they're like, it's you forever.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's you forever.
Well, sure.
Which is like, if that's your kink, Jessa Kane has got you covered forever.
Yeah. But I think, you know, it's funny because you mentioned in Liquette's book, like the baby. I am not a fan of this. I have a hard time with the secret baby because I'm always like,
oh, it's such a good
well,
baby,
and here's
though.
my thing is,
I love.
see, I'm always like, listen, babies are so.
Nisha's gonna come back for secret baby.
Babies are so fucking hard. Why would anyone keep that shit secret, right? But often the times it works for me is when the heroine, you know, was like, I got pregnant with this man I just thought was like normal. And then I thought or realized that he was tied up in crime. And then I had to keep it secret. And an example of that is Bad Neighbor by Molly O'Keefe. And often that is the one time where I can really buy that, like, there was a real reason why it had to be kept secret, because I was like, well, sure, you were terrified. But normally it doesn't work for me. I'm like, fuck, you're just a regular person. It's not a secret goddamn baby. You get some child support and get on with your life.
But this is why Mafia Romances work so well when they're done so well, because fear is a piece of it. Like when I started at the beginning of this episode, I told you the story of like my dad, who was not in the mafia, like working with a bunch of people who were like ancillary to mafia, right? My dad lived with a lot of like work fear that I think came from these people, this world. And so I think that that kind of like very realistic, there is a very real sense of like an understanding of the fear for the reader, of the fear being very real, right? Like, because how often, you know, we talked over text earlier today about Joanna Shupe, right?
Oh, yeah.
And like, and obviously, like the devil of downtown, please.
Yes.
Right? Please. But like in a historical, and I wrote like the Bare Knuckle Bastards, right? Like I've written a criminal like enterprise too, but like in a historical, it's kind of like smoothed over. It's Vaseline to the lens. But like when you're writing, you know, when Liquette or Annika or C.D. Reese or, you know, any of the people that you just mentioned write their books, it feels like real, like it's a real fear.
I also think it's because in a modern romance, we know that means guns, right? Whereas I feel like in historical, you can just have like somebody who you think, I don't know, I think the body count can be a lot higher. I think you're really, maybe the heroine has to really like resign herself to really knowing what that means, as opposed to like Jack Mulligan just being like a pugilist or whatever and being able to like hit people. So maybe it feels like, though, because, you know, I don't know, maybe that's just me. Like the Vaseline of a historical is being like, yeah, you know, like in a knife fight, how many guys could he really kill at once? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about Joanna's book is it kind of goes back to the reason why Cressley's book is so great, that like the hero ends up like giving up, like, or is like separates himself from the crime. Did I spoil it? I don't want to spoil. I feel like I just spoiled.
I don't know. We've talked about that book a lot.
It's fine
on this podcast. Okay. If you haven't read it, more fool you.
Yeah, I'm like, you just haven't been listening to us.
My bad. My bad. But yeah, I think that, there's that separation and there's that morality chain that you mentioned, Sarah, is really twisted within the story to the point where like the heroine is a representation of that morality chain.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and then of course, so we've talked about morality chain. We've talked about like strong heroines. We talked about the heroine who's very much an ingenue when she walks into it.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about sex, which is such a huge piece of so many of these books. Like the slow burn Mafia Romance is not really
that doesn't really exist.
thing.
Maybe that's why I like it so much. I'm all like slow burn, 20% in, and they're like,
I do think I want to shout out Kate Claiborne here because we talk about Dark Mafia Prince by Annika Martin a lot on this podcast, and we have never once discussed the fact that like there is a whole video that is taken of a blowjob in that book where like the hero is literally holding a gun to the heroine's head, and he is not forcing her. It is done very deftly in her point of view, and he's videotaping it to send to her father to like
scare him
for
right.
vengeance. You guys, I know Eric is going to divorce me after this one.
No, he's not.
But the reality is that like this one is like Kate was like, I can't believe you didn't tell me that this happened. And I
like, what are you talking
totally
about?
did not remember that it had happened because it's consent. Like the consent is clear.
But I also feel like
right.
I and maybe this is just like the promise of the premise, right? Like I know going in that some banana shit is going to happen in these books because I feel like there's the subgenres that push against because they're not taking place really in our reality in the same way. The rules get to be different for a lot of interactions.
Well, and it's like this particular subgenre, it allows for all of this. I'm thinking about, I talked earlier this season about Theodora Taylor, who, shout out, Theodora. I didn't know that you went to Smith too, but now, like, that's it. We're sisters forever. You get to be on every episode now. But I wanted to talk about her, Luca, which is really interesting because this is have you read this, Nisha?
Luca? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read Luca.
And so the hero is the son of a mafia don who is kidnapped by a rival don and like tortured in a cage. Like really. So, but it's a retelling, I think and like Theodora, let me know if I'm right. But like, I think it's a retelling of the Minotaur myth, like, because the heroine who is, the heroine is assigned to feed him. Like she is assigned to like go down into this like basement and feed him in the cage. And then when he is finally released from the cage, like he just vows to take revenge. And like, it's a real like dark, messy book. Right. But like, it feels so much like it's a retelling of that story of like the beast in the cage, like being made, like the kind, decent beast being made into like pure vengeance. And then with the only string, like the only piece of his humanity is attached to this woman.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know, this is a crazy subgenre. And I mean, I love it, but a lot is going on.
Like I feel like we're all very apologetic about the subgenre, and whenever I talk about like my love for organized crime romance, I feel very apologetic about it because we know that topics come up that are very sensitive. We know that there can sometimes be a mishandling of certain subjects that could create some, concern or problems or trigger readers, and it needs to be handled deftly. But what I find really fascinating is that we are that apologetic when you have like thrillers and action films and movies that are targeted to different demographics, and no one feels the need to apologize for those movies, or no one feels the need to apologize for enjoying that kind of like action or horror or that kind of media content that has just as much problematic stuff in it. Like, people are praised for liking The Godfather. Why can't we enjoy Mafia Romance?
Yeah. No, you're totally right. You're so right.
You're right. I know you're right.
We're recording in September, and last week or 10 days ago, the Oscars released a diversity rubric, essentially saying in order for a film to be, we'll put links in the show notes, but in order for a film to be nominated for Best Picture, it had to show some measure of diversity because it's 2020. And of course, men on the internet got real mad about The Godfather wouldn't have been able to win an Academy Award. And your favorite movie from 1972 would not probably win an Academy Award in 2020 anyway.
Right.
But separate from that, sorry, gentlemen. But also separate from that, it feels like just what you were saying, The Godfather is a gift to us. The Sopranos were a gift to us, but Mafia Romances, somehow we have to. You're right, Nisha.
Right, where Mafia Romances
about that,
where women or heroines are given the opportunity to have agency and to drive a story and to conquer fear and to have an ability to appear on a page in a way that gives them power. Why are we not able to celebrate that? But I feel like this is supposed to be about joy, and I'm about to get on a soapbox, so I'm going to step back.
I was just going to say, Nisha, this is the joy episode. If you are getting joy out of these books, you're getting joy out of them. Go. Be on your soapbox.
And I think that, the authors who really appreciate the types of the interesting facets of Mafia romance that we've all talked about, and they really do it with care and consideration when they write their stories, and they take chances in a way that can show the different dimensions of humans who are trying to function in these kinds of structures. I feel like they give us a good story that we should celebrate. Yeah. And, I know that in the beginning I mentioned, you guys outed me for my 50 Shades love, but in actuality, I don't feel like it's something that I need to worry about being outed about, because I'm not going to be ashamed for liking, specific romance books when I have identified the concerns, the issues, and the problems that may appear in the story, and I'm aware of them, and I know that they are things that the author should probably focus on developing in future books. But I can appreciate the parts of the story that I resonated with and connected with, and I shouldn't be shamed for liking something because
I mean, to be honest with you, I really have found myself thinking a lot about how what would be the one interstitial if someone's we should do it? I'd be hell no. And it would be actually not this one, right? I was yes, let's. It would be Cops, right? And I feel like there's this whole Law and Order story that gets told in America that's about cops as good guys. A lot of the things that's about Devil of Downtown. I mean, certainly the Her Russian Protector series. Is there's a way in which the community that gets taken care of by this group of people is one that has been abandoned by the government.
Well, it's found family.
Yes.
It's the mafia's wrapped up in immigration, it's wrapped up in race. It's wrapped up in this concept of we are not the community that's being protected.
Yeah.
And I mean, the one thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure how to get there, so I'm just going to I don't know, next chapter, is Russian mobsters. I feel I think so. The Italians and the Irish really own.
Right, film and TV, yeah.
But in romance, a lot of them are Russian.
Huh.
And I wonder why that is.
I think the interesting thing about Russian mobsters is it's the gentrification of toxic masculinity.
Say more.
Well, vampires, right?
Like vampires. It is, you are able to have toxic masculinity appear on the page in a way that is easily digestible because of you're assigning it to a Russian identity, and that Russian identity kind of appears through stereotypes that have come out of, Russian leadership and Russian media and things like that. So I think it's rooted in stereotype. I think it's rooted in the gentrification of the toxic masculinity.
Is it rooted in that Eastern Promises movie with Viggo Mortensen? I mean, I do wonder.
We said it then, we'll say it again. Viggo Mortensen can
big
get
part
it.
2. I mean, right? Or I do wonder sometimes, I wonder, I mean, I don't know, sometimes I do think, right, I had never watched, the Motorcycle Club romance. At some point I was like, I don't understand where this is coming from. And someone was like, Sons of Anarchy. And I was like, what is that? And then
No, but Sons of Anarchy came after Motorcycles.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting.
I mean, Kristen Ashley has been writing longer than Sons of Anarchy has been on.
Yeah, but I'm talking about I don't know. I guess the timeline of how things bubble up to the surface in pop culture is one that, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we need a PhD and not just us.
Maybe it goes back to the Saint, that Russian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like if you grew up during the Cold War, the Russians were so... Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of it too, right? It's fear. I really think, fear and sex are weirdly connected, psychologically.
Yeah.
This is where we need Adriana. But
I was about to say, where is Adriana?
I know, we need Adriana on here. But it feels like fear is I feel like there is this very real sense of us being drawn, or readers being drawn to the things that we are told we should be afraid of.
Yeah.
And Russian...
Every James Bond villain for 25 years was a hot Russian guy.
We grew up, all of us grew up with this big bad of, what would happen if Russia came.
You guys, I still kind of am shit, we lost the Cold War and everything else. I didn't expect it to turn out this way.
Romance lied to me.
James Bond lied to me.
Where are my Cressley Cole Russian heroes saving the day?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I feel like...
And even Christine Feehan, she had 12 books about Russian organized crime members. She had a whole series and then additional books at the end of another one.
But we talked about this when we talked about the Cressley Mafia books. We talked about the fact that they felt like she had just taken the Roth brothers, the vampires, and lifted them up and set them down in modern day and made them people. Yeah. And I think that there is that piece too. This kind of
supercharged, right?
I mean, I think Nisha really hit it on the head. I think you're right that it is about gentrification and masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
100%.
What other favorites do you have, Nisha? Did you list them all?
I think we talked about the ones that I wanted to hit. L'Iquette, definitely. Joanna Shupe, Katie Robert.
What's the sexiest one you've ever read? Do you have one?
I 100% number 2, Cressley Cole's trilogy.
Yeah, the Master.
Oh yeah, 100. The Master is so sexy. How can you compete against that?
I get to tag chastity belts again.
Girl. Yeah,
you're welcome. You're welcome, people who find us by searching chastity belts.
I mean, there's also a book in the Christine Feehan Drake Sisters series that is incredibly sexy.
Panther book.
That is not the Panther book. They're witches.
Christine Feehan is one of my she's a shadowed spot for me.
Enter at your own risk is my disclaimer. Enter Christine Feehan at your own risk. But I think it's number 5 of that series. I want to look on my phone, but hold on.
I mean, Judgment Road, which is kind of adjacent to that series, is by far the most fucked up book I've ever read, and I love it.
That's a great title.
Yes, of course it is.
Mm-hmm. Judgment Road.
Yeah, they're all Vendetta Road and Vengeance Road, but Judgment Road is by far
I want to live on Vengeance Road.
It's called...
I'd like to buy a home on Vengeance Road.
Could you imagine that subdivision though? Every house would have like a real spiky fucking fence. You're gonna die on that thing. I live at the corner of Vengeance Road and fuck you
We
Boulevard.
need a map. Maynard County, Kansas.
No. This is
Oh
like,
my gosh.
yeah.
This is not in Maynard County. This is...
No. This is
Vengeance Road is like on the corner of like Petty Avenue.
It's probably in Rhode Island, let's be honest.
It's Turbulent Sea, Christine Fahan, number 6 in the Drake Sisters series, Turbulent Sea, and the main character is a singer who can seduce people to do what she wants with her voice.
like a siren.
She's a siren.
Like a siren. And the hero is a self-assigned bodyguard.
Self-assigned. Wait, can he be seduced by her voice as well?
He cannot, because he's also a witch.
Oh.
And he is the 7th son of a 7th son.
Oh, lucky.
And it is so delicious because there was so much buildup throughout the few books in the series prior to that story, because they have like this mating mark that they get if you found your mate.
Does
and
it appear?
Like, it doesn't, you can't see it. The only time you see it is the first time you get it. And then after that, but you feel it. So like you feel the person if you like touch it. So like she does this scene where she like licks her hand and he like loses his mind.
I'm gonna get this book. I'm getting it. Do I have to read the other books in the series first?
There's some things that are connected because there is this overall arching story of like what he's trying to do to break down this crime syndicate, but and how like she and her sisters are targeted, from different people who are trying to basically harness their power or uncover their power. And but I don't think you need to read the other books in the series to kind of to understand. That
and
story
these
in
it's to
particular.
understand what happens when she licks the mark. Just really all
it's
I'm
really
interested
good.
in right
It's
now.
really, really good.
It's Joy Month.
Joy and licking.
Yes.
Understand? I'm a weirdo.
We all are.
But Nisha told me I shouldn't feel bad about it, so I'm not.
No, you should not.
Your joy is just loving what you love and being okay with it.
Absolutely.
I feel like we've really
Crack the code.
we've done some solid TBR building here.
Always.
You guys are never going to call me back.
We are. You're going to come back and talk about secret babies, and we're just going to make Jen.
I'm just going to be like,
what?
I'll just take screenshots of my face being like, what the fuck?
But like, truthfully, they're just these guys. These heroes are just like they're just larger than life. It just goes back to that. Like, I want a hero who's like huge.
In more ways than one.
Oh, funny.
I remember feeling. So I live in Brooklyn, and there's a very large Slavic community in Brooklyn, like Russians and East Europeans. And I remember the first time I read that series, that Mafia series by Cressley, which my friend Louisa Edwards recommended I read, and Sophie Jordan recommended I read, and I put it off and put it off and put it off, and then finally I read it, because I came to Mafia Romance late, obviously. Now you know why. And I remember being at the coffee shop and, like, seeing this, like, clearly, like, Slavic man walk by, and me just being like, oh. I want to go to there. And I was like, no, this is what has Cressley done to me. Mm-hmm. And then that was it. Then I started reading Mafia Romances. So thanks for nothing.
Well, thanks, Nisha, for being with us. And share with us your favorite. I mean, there's so many. I will do I'll look at the Goodreads list, and often they'll be like 100 or 200 books. Like the Mafia Romance books list is like 900 books. Mm-hmm. So this is
definitely
a deep pool.
But I also feel like so many of these writers they found their their sweet spot, and they're just writing mafia romance, which is, great if that's what you're into. They've got you covered. For sure.
And I think that Goodreads list on queer mafia romance was really like my guiding light in trying to figure out like to read more queer romance in this subgenre. So I highly recommend linking that and checking that out. And then and also, make sure you check trigger warnings, because if you've never read a mafia romance before, it's really important to kind of make sure that you protect yourself.
Yeah, these are not like don't go in.
There are no cinnamon rolls.
Don't go in unprepared.
There are no. No.
So, maybe go back and listen to the alpha episode first, and then wade into mafia romance. Right. know what you're dealing with. I think we did a good job though explaining. Like, I don't think anybody's gonna walk away being like, "Oh yeah, this is."
Why do people listen to this? Right? Yeah. Why do people read these? I think there's a lot of reason to read these. Yeah.
This person runs a coffee. This person is a baker. Nobody's expecting a baking hero. But maybe you could write that if you're out there and you want to write
I know this is like we're at the end of the episode, but I have to share something really interesting with you. So for like consulting work, I've been reading like a lot of policy law stuff, and I came across something interesting where organized crime families are leaving like gun trafficking and drug trafficking and going into like online advertising, because it's really interesting, because 20% of online advertising is like the revenue is created through fraud. And basically what happens is, like, say you have like a family member who opens up an email that has like a link, like a bad link. They'll click the link and someone will like basically be able to see everything that they do in their computer. And what advertisers will do, or what like fraud organized crime families will do, is they will basically like sell ads, like ad hits to companies, and basically say, company X, we promise you 100 million hits in 6 months, and that company will pay the crime family a certain amount of money. And that crime family will then basically go to these computers that they've infiltrated, and they will do what's called like headless I think it's like headless browsing or something, where they go and they click on the person's website, or they'll click on like the different, products that they have to show that they've generated hits, but it's all fake. So organized crime families are now going into advertising.
Checks out.
And so maybe you can get a computer.
It's the end of an era.
It's like, I'm waiting for someone to write me like an organized crime family that is just a bunch of like software engineers, like hackers and software engineers.
What's interesting is that makes perfect sense, because like younger people in these families, like they don't want to.
Right.
They don't want to go into like guns and drugs. Like they want to go. They want to, these families have a lot of money now. They're like working toward being acceptable in society. And so these kids are going to college, and they don't, so it makes sense that they would come home and be like, hey, we can actually streamline this crime.
Let's make some money this different way.
Make it safer. No, everybody can they can have a 401k. And
just as long as we're all clear that nobody is kidnapping small white children out of the Midwest. That's all I have to say about that.
What?
That QAnon bullshit.
Where did that come
all that
from?
QAnon bullshit. All these people who like really think that like I like cannot even.
No, that's
Stop reading all that crazy news on Facebook, everybody. Focus.
Oh my gosh. I may have gotten the advertising like description or explanation a little skewed, but like that's the general story.
That's amazing.
I mean, it just sounds like classic money laundering,
right?
Too.
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely.
Which is, I remember when I was growing up, there was this, so in Providence there's a neighborhood called Federal Hill, and it was where like all the mafia, like that's where like the mafia existed in Providence. That was their like main location. And there was a video game store, like so it was like an arcade repair store. Like you could bring your arcade version of like Ms. Pac-Man to this store,
wow.
and they would like repair it for you, ostensibly. Like, that was what it said on the sign. And they had like pinball machines and stuff inside this store. And I would walk past it like every Saturday morning with my dad, because we would go to this one bakery to like buy the only Italian bread in the state of Rhode Island my father would eat. And so we would pass this place, and they always had like pinball machines all inside this like closed up building. And I loved pinball, and all I wanted was a pinball machine like in my house. And I would say every time we went by, like, I really want a pinball machine. Like, do you think we could get a pinball machine for like Christmas or my birthday or whatever? And finally, when I was like 12 or 13, my dad was like, Sarah, the store is never open. And I was like, why? And he was like, he explained to me that this was like a complete front. Was like a known front for like one of the biggest crime families in Rhode Island. So
I'm going to have a good time looking this shit up for show notes, everybody. I just want you to know.
Yeah. Nisha, come back and talk about Secret Babies with us.
I will, 100%. And Shakespeare. That's the other one.
And
let's talk about Shakespeare retellings.
Come back and talk about Shakespeare.
Let's do it.
Because tell everybody, so you have the Takeover Effect and the Legal Affair, which are both out. What is next?
So the third book in the Singh family trilogy, which is coming out next year, along with my next YA novel, which is called Radha and Jay's Recipe for Romance, which is about a classically trained dancer who has to partner with a Bollywood dancer in order to win a competition so she can basically win her freedom for the future that she's always wanted. And my very first adult rom-com is coming out in September of next year. And right now, it is untitled, but it is a homage to Taming of the Shrew.
Nice.
Which I'm very excited about.
Love Taming of the Shrew here. Well, that's all great. But we're not going to wait a year to have Nisha back. We're going to have Nisha back for Secret Babies and make Jen super uncomfortable. And then you can come back and talk about Shakespeare when that comes out. But Nisha, thanks for coming and talking about stuff that gives you joy.
Thank you for having me.
Anything else? Anything else give you joy these days?
I have to admit, you guys have been giving me a lot of joy.
Nice.
So listening to your voices and your extra episode this past week was also just when it hit my iPhone, I was like, score.
You know what's going to give Nisha joy? She's about to log off and go read Ivan. I got you, girl.
I'm excited.
I got you.
I appreciate Ivan. I'm ready for it.
Well, I'm really glad that we are here for you. I'm glad that you're here for us. I'm glad that you were our cruise director for 50 Shades Freeze.
It was my pleasure.
Truly.
Even though you guys are all haters, all you are
deeply
haters.
problematic on so many levels.
Movie number 2, it's great. Movie number 2 is...
I'm co-signing Adriana's strongly worded letter this week.
It is definitely the third movie, and the third book is not as good. There's a lot of issues. You cannot tie trauma to like the BDSM, the kink.
No, fundamentally, Anna, leave that man.
Oh God,
leave him.
Leave him.
Yeah.
Anyway,
he needed to be in cold storage. He really did.
But you know what? I will confess that I have watched again. I've watched several times. Is that scene?
The flip scene?
Not the flip, but I do appreciate the flip, like in pure
flip scene's great.
The scene that I really love the most in all three of them is the scene where he's just been in the helicopter crash and then he comes into his apartment and his whole family's there and then he's like, let me go say hi to my girl. And I'm like, love that.
My favorite is in movie 1 where she like goes into the elevator and he goes, fuck the contract. I was like, yes.
All right, here's my favorite. It's so wrong. After she like wanders in the rain for 3 hours and she comes back in and he's like, where the fuck have you been? I'm just like, why is that so hot that you are just like so I don't know. He's like so outraged. She's been missing. She doesn't have her cell phone or her purse. Go out and find her.
I mean, but the problem is he's just on the phone with some idiot. Why isn't he out there getting wet, finding her?
Because
and also, why doesn't he ever work? Guys,
listen, men don't have to work in romance. Only women do. Come on.
I was very strategic in the
He
legal
holds
affair.
Enterprises Limited.
Like definitely very strategic when I wrote like billionaires, because they're always like, I've worked with like these guys before. They're always working. Why is Christian Grey never working? I'm sorry. There's not enough biometrics in his house.
He works out a lot.
He does.
And he works
does
out
the
a lot.
important work.
And yes,
Working out
there's
and
not
working
enough
her
conference
over.
calls.
Wait, I will say this. So I bought it on Amazon Streaming, and on Amazon Streaming, there's like a function, like if you accidentally click a thing, which I did, it shows you like pop-up trivia the whole time you're watching. So I accidentally clicked it for some length of time, and it told me that Jamie Dornan was supposed to be, that they wanted another montage of like Christian Grey working out in the whatever one he does the like pommel horse trick in.
Yes.
And he was like, and they were like, but we can't figure out how to get it in like naturally. And he was like, well, if you put a pommel horse in the workout room in the morning, I can do this like yoga thing on the pommel horse. And then everyone will know that I'm like exceptionally well.
Sure.
Like I've treated my body like a temple.
Okay.
And I was like, that makes perfect sense.
Fine.
Like, I would have appreciated, like, scenes of them going to therapy. Like, that would have been, like, okay, like, even if you don't
That's
show
like
the therapy
fanfic
session.
Adriana's writing right now.
That is the fanfic that Adriana's writing. Oh, my God. Like, come on. Like, take care of yourselves, guys.
The
Like, you
fanfic
can't
I'm
lean on
writing
each
right now
other
is
for, like...
she left his ass and he is still in cold storage and working on his business and miserable.
Exactly.
And then she will take him back
Having
3 years from now.
He's paying a lot of money in child support, and she's living quite happily.
yeah.
I mean, that's what I was hoping for, right? Like, someone to write fan fiction where she intentionally has, like, taken over his company and becomes...
Yes, tell everyone
like,
your, like, dark theory.
Yeah. So,
It's
like,
perfect.
I have this theory, and this is why I think I love the series so much, because I have, like, used...
You've retconned it.
I know. Like, I've taken the story that's actually written by E.L. James and these movies that are written by her husband, and I have in my mind twisted it in such a way that it's like no longer the original anymore. But like, what I would like to see is like in her perspective, how she intentionally went to his office first just to do the interview for her roommate, but when she realizes the potential of like how she can get in, and she overhears a conversation of like two people talking about like his proclivities, and she ends up like deciding to like manipulate her, like the way that she presents herself to him in order to like rope him in and then take over his business. Like,
She was Christian Grey
takes
all
over the
along.
business. She was Christian Grey all along. That's the story that I want.
It's like Fight Club.
Yes. Yes. And like you see her like actually like putting on that red lipstick. Like you see like scenes of that, like, and looking at herself in the mirror, and like that's the mirror scene I want.
She like goes and gets a job at the hardware store because she knows
He's coming to buy zip ties.
Yes.
I like it
Yeah.
very, very much, Nisha. That is the book I would like to read.
And she's like a psychology minor, right? So she knows.
So obviously, psychology minors know everything.
I'm just taking it all in, everybody.
Don't poke holes in my bubble.
How much would you have at the end been like, this blows my mind, I'm in love with it?
Yeah, it would have been great. Anisha's pretty busy, but I think she could find some time to write that for us. I do.
I don't know if I'm the best person for this, but...
No, that's a great domestic thriller. Isn't that what we would call it, a domestic thriller?
Definitely. Someone
Somebody
called
out
Jane
there
and
is
Krantz. She would do it
Yes.
justice.
She really would. Everyone, Nisha, tell everyone where they can find you on the internet.
You can find me at Nisha Writes on Instagram and on Twitter. You can find me on my website at www.nisha-sharma.com. And you can find me on YouTube at Nisha Writes Online.
And Nisha is a very sort of deeply committed planner who is guiding me through planning, and you can watch videos on her YouTube channel of her planning. Everyone,
Thank you.
This is Fated Mates. You can find us at fatedmates.net. You can get merch there. There's clothing. There are pins. There are stickers. There's all sorts of stuff. You can also see all the music that is in all of these episodes on the Spotify playlist that's linked there. Transcripts are there. Thank you to Linda and Gwen who are helping us with transcripts now. Stay tuned next week. More joy. You have 2 weeks until the election. So make sure that you filled out your ballots and that you have a plan to vote. You can volunteer. You can still write postcards. You can still phone bank. You can still text bank. We are here for you. Stay fired up.
Yeah.
Vote Biden-Harris. And blue right down the line.
Hi, Fated Mates. My name is Julia. I'm the Bliss Tour on Twitter and Instagram and those things, but I'm taking a break from social media, so I probably won't be there. But I am calling because I wanted to talk to you about The Heiress Effect by Courtney Milan. I read this book in 2014, and I'd probably been reading romance for a while there, but I didn't think of myself at that point, but I didn't think of myself as a romance reader, because I didn't read historicals, and I never wanted to read historicals. Like back in the 70s, my sister read like Sweet Savage Love, and when I was in college in the 80s, I had friends who had Harlequins that had the drawn covers. They traded those, and I didn't get it. I was a sci-fi fantasy paranormal reader, even though maybe I didn't realize that some of those paranormals were romances. So I even read 50 Shades of Grey and still didn't consider myself like capital R romance reader. And then I don't know how I got it or found it. It was probably a daily sale or something like that. And I started reading The Heiress Effect, and I was like, what is going on? And then I just took a deep dive into Courtney Milan. Her characters are so layered and complicated, and I called to say, hey, I'm explaining what this meant to me. It was just like a feeling. It didn't feel like it was just so detached. They seemed like real people, even though they lived 100 years ago or whatever. So that's what started it. Courtney Milan's Heiress Effect, deep dive into her books. And then I started on Sherry Thomas, took a deep dive into that. And Luckiest Lady in London has probably the second best prologue of any romance. And then I dived into Elizabeth Hoyt's Maiden Lane. And yeah, I am a capital R romance reader. That's total Freudian slip. I'm a capital R romance reader. And yeah, I love historicals now. Who would have thunk it? All right. Thanks. Take care.